let us discuss some of my favorite movies, music, musicals, TV from the year 2024. Obviously, I talk a lot about books on this channel, but I also wanted to shout out some of the non-bookish things that I really liked this year, because while comparatively I watched way less movies and way less TV than I did read books, I still saw some things that rewired my brain chemistry that I'm still thinking about. So let's start with movies and TV. I have two movies to talk about, both of which I saw in the latter half of the year, so I don't know if recency bias is kind of contributing. But the first one is The Wild Robot. This is an animated movie from DreamWorks about a caretaker robot who gets stranded in an island that's only inhabited by wildlife. And in addition to learning how to fit into nature, she also ends up being imprinted on by a baby goose. There's a lot more going on, a lot more sci-fi as well than you would expect, but at the end of the day, I just say, just watch it, watch the story unfold. It is one of the most beautiful stories I've ever seen. Visually, it is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. They use this combination of both 3D animation as well as hand-painted art that created stunning visual pieces. The themes of parenting and also found family were so good and literally brought me to tears. And the score, oh my god, Chris Bowers deserves all the praise for this movie. I think he also scored Bridgerton, which I also really like, but he's becoming one of my favorite composers of all time now. I have replayed I Could Use a Boost so many times. It is one of my favorite things to listen to when I'm studying. It's just so good, and I want to see it again. And the second movie is Wicked, which definitely has some recency bias in it, but I've seen it twice now, and I loved it both times, so I don't think I have to explain the plot of Wicked to you. Backstory to the Wizard of Oz, backstory to the Wicked Witch of the West, friendship between Elphaba and Glinda at school. But I think what contributed to how much I liked this movie was that there had been so much hype for almost 10 years. This movie has been in technical development. It was announced to be adapted in 2013 and is finally reaching theaters, and only as a part 1 too, which was crazy. But Wicked is one of my favorite musicals, and so I went into this with high expectations and it delivered. I honestly thought it improved on the musical, at least Act 1 of the musical. We don't know Act 2 yet. Because while I love the musical, I always felt that it was a little bit rushed, specifically in developing Elphaba and Glinda's friendship and showing that change in dynamic and the switch. The way they adapted the Oz's ballroom scene was one of my favorite things to witness this year. They took a moment that in the musical was kind of played off for laughs and made it into this really somber, really emotionally vulnerable scene for Elphaba that I was on the verge of tears. And it was at that point that I knew that they were cooking something here. They knew what they were doing. That and the musical numbers. The people yearned for choreography. The people yearned for grand musical numbers. Now we're moving on to TV. And one of the first shows that I watched this year was One Day on Netflix. One Day is a remake of the movie One Day, which is based off of a book, neither of which I have watched or read. But I love the show. It's basically about these two friends, Emma and Dexter, who meet the night of their college graduation. And each episode we follow them on one day each year for 20 years, going through their relationship, ups and downs of their friendship, as well as the kind of complicated messiness of their developing romance. I thought the performances were really great. In particular, Dexter's actor was honestly kind of phenomenal in some scenes, but to be fair, Dexter's character arc just has a little bit more emotional variability, I feel than Emma's. But regardless, I liked both of them and their chemistry with each other. And again, it was a story that made me sob. I had heard people talking about how they sobbed at the end of One Day, and I was prepared going into it. But then I got to the end and I was in a puddle for several hours. The next show I want to mention is Percy Jackson and the Olympians Season 1. This technically started in 2023, but it ended in 2024, so I'm counting it here. So I am a huge Percy Jackson fan. I have a shelf right there. And I read the original PJO series 6 times at this point, so I'm very familiar with it. I had a lot of expectations going into the show, and I ended up really enjoying it, and I thought they did a really good job. Was it perfect? No, but I feel like it added so much to the lore of Percy Jackson and to the thematic landscape of the series. In particular, episode 3, 5, and 8, I knew that this team understands what the series is trying to say, and that was the most important part to me. It added so many layers about the idea of monsters and what and who we decide to call a monster. We also added more about the relationship between the demigods and their godly parents and the neglect and the consequences of that neglect. There was a lot added in the relationship between Percy and Sally and the relationship between Sally and Poseidon. It just showed me that they really care to develop this story and give it the weight that it deserves. And in my mind, they took a lot of the things that I really liked about the series and kind of put them at the forefront in the TV show. Another reason why I wanted to mention the show here is because the show kind of received a lot of initial backlash and kind of review bombing because of the choice in hiring a Black Annabeth. The actress Leah Jeffries to this day receives so much racism and hatred and people like just not giving her a chance. And I feel like for a lot of people it kind of clouded the perception of the show because they were so kind of hung up on having these book accurate depictions. And so I just wanted to be clear that she did a great job. The next show I want to mention is Arcane, both season 1 and season 2 I watched this year. This is an animated series inspired by the game League of Legends. I have not played League of Legends and probably will never play League of Legends, but that didn't affect my experience with the show. It's like a futuristic fantasy series and it's set in a city that is highly segregated into a top and an undercity. The top city of Piltover is extremely privileged, has a lot of resources. Meanwhile, the undercity of Zon is riddled with corruption, violence, and drug addiction. And our main two characters, I mean, there's a lot more characters than just them, but our like main characters are Jinx and Vi, who are sisters that end up getting orphaned by Piltover enforcers. Right off the bat, I have to mention the animation. It is stunning and so creative and dynamic and diverse. I'm pretty sure season 2 cost like $250 million. That's like more than most blockbuster movies, but you can tell like they put so much care into the animation. One of the strongest things about the show is its ability to subvert your expectations. Like it is not afraid to go in a direction that many would feel like is not safe or not possible for the narrative, but in a way that's also doesn't feel random. Like everything still feels organic in the context of this world. It's for this reason that I think that season 1 is a little stronger than season 2, because season 1 got to kind of just like hone in on this chaos and really just dive deep into the dark aspects, whereas season 2 had the responsibility of trying to wrap it all up into a cohesive and satisfying ending, which I think is very difficult to do. And I don't think they did it horribly, but I was a tad disappointed in like the very end of the show, how they decided to end things. But definitely a very fantastic show. Okay, now moving on to music. And for this, I might as well just go through my Spotify Wrapped. Even though I hate that Spotify Wrapped does not include any data past October 31st, I think that is so ridiculous. That's 2 months worth of listening that is just never accounted for. Last.fm documents everything, but they haven't released the Wrapped yet. So number 1 artist for me is never a surprise, it's Taylor Swift, because it's always by like a mile more than the second top artist. Taylor just has such a huge discography, and I listen to like maybe 90% of it, that there is just no competition, like no other artist can really compete with that just by simply like the amount of songs that she has that I could potentially listen to. And I do, a lot. My number 2 is a little bit embarrassing, but it's Jorge Rivera Herranz. And the reason it's number 2 is because I listened to so much Epic the Musical this year. Epic the Musical is a musical retelling of The Odyssey. It was a project started by Jorge on TikTok many years ago, like in 2021. And since then, he's been releasing EPs of different sagas of The Odyssey. I was obsessed with the first 2 sagas when they came out in like 2022, I think. And then I kind of fell off because there was like a big gap in between the next couple sagas. But this year I kind of fell back into it again because I learned that many sagas had released since the last time I listened, and also that the concluding saga would be this year. So there was like a straight month, I think in October, where I like only listened to Epic. So that's not a surprise that it's number 2. Number 3 is Olivia Rodrigo, also not a surprise for me, in a similar but not exact reason to Taylor Swift. There's not many artists where I download nearly every song on their album, the only 2 basically being Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo. But I think in particular I had Olivia this year because she released Obsessed and So American on digital, and I was replaying that so much. Number 4 was Sabrina Carpenter because of Short and Sweet. I replayed Sharpest Tool so many times. I think that's my favorite song off the album. But I've been listening to Sabrina Carpenter for quite some time. I used to be obsessed with Girl Meets World, so that's when I first got exposed to her, and I have been semi-following her music since then. But it wasn't until Emails I Can't Send and then this most recent album that I really became invested. And number 5 was like kind of surprise, kind of not a surprise. It's Noah Cyrus. It kind of feels like left field because I feel like Noah Cyrus does not talk that much in pop culture, but I really liked her most recent album. I think it came out last year, but I discovered it this year. It's a lot more of like an acoustic folk pop sound that I just find very appealing, especially when I was studying. I feel like that's when I listened to it more. Now into my top songs. Number 1 was I Look in People's Windows by Taylor Swift. This is from the Torture Poets Department, the anthology. I feel like I have to make a statement on my opinion on Torture Poets because there was so much controversy at the time. The first half, I enjoyed it. I don't think it's a bad album. I just think it's not her strongest, but there's definitely some strong songs there. So Long London, Guilty as Sin, Who is Afraid of Little Old Me, The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, Love of My Life. Like, there are some heavy hitters there, but I think that the anthology is like miles ahead. And I honestly don't even know why she didn't just do it as a separate album, because they have different vibes. But I love the anthology. I replayed that so much this year. Hence why I Look in People's Windows is number 1. We have a few representatives of the anthology here. Number 3 is The Prophecy, and number 5 is How Did It End? These 3 I honestly think are some of the best songs that she's ever written. Number 2 is See the Light by Steven Sanchez. He's more famous for his song Until I Found You, which is like huge on TikTok. But I randomly came across this song and it was like such an earworm for me. I had it on loop for like 2 months. And number 4 is Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. I admittedly did not know about this song until their performance at the Grammys. Tracy Chapman and whoever did that like cover of the song, it's like a modern artist, I forgot his name. But that performance was like so beautiful, and then after that I kind of got on a rabbit hole about the song and Tracy Chapman and just like all the lyrics and the meaning behind them. And so yeah, I became obsessed. So now moving on to musicals. This year I only watched one stage show, and that was the Outsiders musical, so kind of by default it has to be my favorite. And I definitely really enjoyed the show, especially the choreography and direction I thought was really well deserved, all the awards they got for that. And the song Great Expectations from that show, I love. I think it's brilliant, and it has such a high emotional climax. Like, I get chills when I listen to it. And I mentioned this already, but I really loved Epic the Musical this year. My favorite was the Wisdom Saga, which introduced Telemachus. I loved Miko's voice. And some other songs that are my favorites are Scylla, The Challenge, The Underworld. Hello, future me here. Realized I forgot to include a lot of things about Epic the Musical, namely 2 of my favorite songs, which were Not Sorry for Loving You and Love in Paradise. I think I just really liked Calypso's voice. It was so beautiful, so addictive. It's just the quality of it was so stunning. I love that singer now. I feel like if you've ever had a Hamilton phase, then you would like Epic the Musical. There are definitely some parts where you can definitely see the Lin-Manuel Miranda inspiration come through. As someone who did have a Hamilton phase, this definitely did scratch that Hamilton itch. I think what I also liked about this experience with Epic is that you got to see Jorge's thought process and the decisions that he made when developing musical themes for each character, because he was chasing that path on TikTok. And I'm someone who loves a behind the scenes. I love getting to understand how a piece of work got to be where it is. And so yeah, if any of that at all sounds interesting to you, then I'd recommend Epic the Musical. The last 2 things I want to mention as favorites of 2024 are podcasts that I'm listening to. And the first one I want to mention is Seaweed Brain Pod. The 2 hosts of this podcast, Erica and Carter, started this show back in 2020, I believe, where they were rereading the Percy Jackson books and giving their thoughts, analyses. I discovered them last year when the show was coming out because I loved listening to their takes and their analyses about each episode. It helped me gain an appreciation for things that like I didn't even catch, or mythological context I didn't know about, or things about the books that I didn't remember. Their commentary is such a good mix of like fun, but also educational and intelligent, and I just love listening to them. The other podcast is the Perfect Person podcast, made by Miles Bonsignore. I'm like a big Try Guys fan, and Miles was the podcast producer of Try Guys, but I think 2 years ago he started his own podcast where he calls people, answers their problems in a really funny way. And when I tell you that this show is my dose of serotonin every week, I am not lying. I look forward to it every week. I even got Patreon because I needed to have an extra day of podcasts to listen to. I actually have Patreon for both of these podcasts as a way to further prove how much I'm obsessed with them. Miles is just one of the funniest people, and also this podcast has a good mix of like really hilarious moments, but also really down-to-earth moments and meaningful emotional moments as well. And so I just had to mention that as a highlight of my year. So those are all my non-book related favorite things from this year. And let me clarify, these are not things that came out this year, but things that I just experienced this year. Some of them did come out, but some of them came out a while ago. Please let me know something that you've really enjoyed this year in the comments. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.